And the change that's happened is that it is much, much wetter there now. And the result of this is that in order to grow wheat, you need fungicides. Well, because they are organic farmers, can't use fungicides. And so as a result, after 50 years of growing wheat on this farm, they've had to stop. Now, we all know that industry is offering as a solution to climate change issues biotech solutions. This new generation of GMOs called climate-ready crops. And already it has breathed new life into the push for GMO wheat, which everyone in North Dakota thought was long since dead. It's on the rebound now. But again, because the Podals had this different sense of themselves, when they faced this problem, they started thinking, okay, well, what can we do about it? So I'll read a little passage from the book. In the 1990s, the Podals and 7 other organic farms in North Dakota formed a group called the Farm Breeder Club. They too intended to breed a wheat for the future, but using a totally different set of priorities. As they saw it, the current food crisis was linked to a much bigger issue. Over the past century, the industrialized world built an agricultural system using a scaffold of external supports: cheap fuel to run machinery, fertilizer manufactured from natural gas, imported water for irrigation, pesticides to eliminate insects, weeds, and diseases. With these inputs, fantastic yields were achieved, the likes of which the world had never seen. The problem was that the scaffold became inseparable from the system itself. Agriculture could not function, the world could not eat without those external supports, yet suddenly they were running out. Oil and gas reserves were dwindling, aquifers were being drained, and climate change had already begun to amplify the challenges. According to David and his comrades, more of the same scaffold-supported, yield-fixated production was not the solution. To feed the world now and in the future, agriculture would have to learn to stand on its own 2 feet. Likewise, plant breeding. For decades, the focus had been on creating high-yielding crops designed for the conventional system. Called prima donnas by detractors, these breeds thrive only in a narrow environment supported by chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and often irrigation. But the Farm Breeder Club wanted to create just the opposite: workhorse varieties that would thrive without the scaffold and be resilient enough to withstand whatever curveballs climate change threw them. The Podals were already growing a plant that could serve as a model, one that was, to use David's words, truly enduring. It was a proso millet called Crown, which the family had grown and saved back every year since they bought the farm in 1953. On most modern varieties, the head of the plant is tightly closed, but this one's is a loose, open spray of stems, which allows it to shade out weeds below. More importantly, this millet has muscle. Its seeds are smaller than the head of a dressmaker's pin, and yet they can emerge from 4 inches down in bone-dry soil. Once grown, it can kill off Canada thistle plants that dare to emerge in its midst. And because it has adapted itself so perfectly to the farm, in 55 years this millet has never failed the Podals. In years when it has not rained a drop, this millet still produced a crop of excellent quality. In 1982, when it was hailed down to the ground in mid-July, the stalks grew back and made a crop that was harvested in September. As David and Dan watched their wheat crops succumb to disease, they couldn't help but think about the millet and wonder, what if we had a wheat like this? The natural place to go with such a concern would be NDSU, the state's land-grant college. But for years, their public breeding efforts have been geared towards serving the conventional wheat industry. So David and the others have instead done what farmers do when something needs to be done. They figured out how to do it themselves. First, they conducted scientific comparisons of dozens of wheat varieties, modern releases from NDSU, as well as heirloom varieties, some of which were more than a century old. Guided by two NDSU researchers, the farmers replicated the sorts of tests done in university research fields, right down to the tedious data collection. The difference was that they executed the tests on their own farms, without chemicals, and judged according to their own criteria. Bushels per acre, yes, but also things like how quickly the plant emerged and how well it shaded out weeds. They were looking for varieties that might work on their farms without the scaffold, as well as for those that they might crossbreed to create new kinds of wheat. Before they ever reached that point, luck brought a new variety to them. It came in the hands of a professor emeritus from Oregon State University named Matt Colding, a white-haired plant breeder who has long since retired but still goes to the test plots every day of the growing season. He was born on a farm in Shawnee, North Dakota, a few hours north of the Podolls, and before his university career, he too was a wheat farmer. Perhaps that's part of the reason why, as a plant breeder, he still values the old-fashioned methods of observation. For him, being out in the field just looking at what happens naturally is an essential part of the work. If you listen to the plants, he says, they'll tell you a lot. The town where he grew up no longer exists aside from a sign on the railroad tracks, but the farm is still intact, and until recently his mother lived there. In 1993, while Matt was visiting, he took a walk through the 40-acre field next to the house. It was rented to a local farmer, and like every other field in North Dakota that year, it was infested with a disease called head scab. Matt says when you walk through a crop, you can tell how good the yield will be by the feel of the plants. As he walked through this field, it felt like nothing more than a bunch of grass, his pants legs barely registering the scrawny leaves and stems. And then, aha! He loves to tell the story. There was a plant shouting, "Here I am, take me!" Estimating 120,000 plants to an acre, Matt guesses there were close to 5 million wheat plants in that field, and in the middle of them all was a single one, untouched by the disease. Matt pulled it out, brought it home to Oregon, and seeded it in his garden in the spring. For 10 years, he selected out the best offspring and planted back their seed the following year. In time, he came up with a strong variety, which he gave the unceremonious name KW960175. When Matt heard about the Farm Breeder Club in 2004, he sent them some seed. There were no strings attached. He just hoped the farmers would be able to make something of it. After a few seasons of making selections on KW960175, the Farm Breeder Club came up with its own variety. It was high-yielding and resistant to diseases, including stem rust and Fusarium head blight. When they tested it for industrial milling and baking qualities, it came up somewhat short, but when they tested it with artisan bakers, it got high marks for flavor and quality. Most of all, it grew well without chemical fertilizers and herbicides. It wasn't the perfect wheat, but it was a good start. In 2006, 3 farmers in North Dakota grew it on 68 acres. The next year, their harvest was sold as seed under the name FBC Dillon, FBC, the acronym for the club, and Dillon for the son of one of the researchers. The Podolls themselves cannot share in the accomplishment directly. Most growers in the Farm Breeder Club are west of their farm, where it's drier. Even FBC Dillon isn't disease-resistant enough for the Podolls to plant it on a commercial scale in their wet climate, at least not yet. Still, David has a patch of it planted near the garden, alongside several other varieties of wheat. He will select seed from the best plants and hope for a gradual improvement, however slowly it comes. He will also make sure to walk among the plants as they grow, just in case there's a plant looking different, looking better, trying to get his attention. Really, though, David measures the value of FBC Dillon in terms much bigger than the success or failure of his own crop. For him, it is significant as a first step toward restoring the vital partnership between farmers and the plants they grow. Consider again the scaffold of dependency built around modern agriculture. As artificial inputs and external supports have become integral parts of our food production, they have eliminated the farmer, the steward. Of course, farmers are still called upon to perform the perfunctory acts of buying seeds and applying fertilizer and driving machinery, but no longer are they asked to think or care or protect. While the Farm Breeder Club aim is to create food plants that can stand on their own 2 feet without the scaffold, it is equally about restoring this essential human role of stewardship. That's because when the scaffold is taken away, what replaces it is the farmer. The real value of the Farm Breeder Club's wheat is that it is designed to begin that restoration. To make FBC Dillon an enduring variety will require the humans who grow it to steward it from year to year, watching its habits and changes and helping it to become something better. To use David's words, the farmers will need to re-establish their intimate participation in the evolutionary process. What makes that possible is a single, small, but salient point. FBC Dillon belongs to no one. Instead of a corporate contract, each shipment of seed comes with a letter from the Farm Breeder Club. In it, the club encourages recipients to save organic seed and to promote it with their neighbors. They also ask that if the recipients sell some of the harvest as seed, that they collect a 10% development fee and return that to the club to support its future work. But the whole thing is done on the honor system. At the bottom of the letter, instead of a dotted line to sign, there is just a quote. It says, "Seeds are our past, present, and future. May we always possess the wisdom and knowledge to use them appropriately."
Yes.
So, when I talk about this next stage in the evolution of the role that the farmers play in our society, this is it. What the Podolls are doing on their farm is it. What the Farm Breeder Club is doing is it. What Tony does on his own and with his group, that's it. But what's more, they are not isolated examples. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of farmers and ranchers around this country who are doing it. And in fact, I know there are some in this room. The people who come to mind are Klaus and Mary Hall Martins, but I'm sure that there are dozens of you who I don't know who also fit this bill. What I mean to say is that this transformation of the role that farmers play in our society is already taking place. And just as right now we can look back to the turn of the century and identify the change that took place with farmers and this new role of industrial producers that they took on, I think that in, say, 50 years, we're going to be able to look back on the changes that are taking place right now and identify them as the transformation that they are. But the problem is that we're not just going to wake up one day and suddenly see this change. It's not going to come through passing a certain piece of legislation or winning a certain court case. It comes through two things that are much harder to pinpoint. And the first thing is those simple, deliberate choices. The Podolls deciding that the first priority of their farm is going to be to feed the people on it. Tony's decision to seek enlightenment